Hey, tribe, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of In Touch with Terri. This conversation today we are going to have, it is not timely, it's pivotal. You're going to want to stay tuned, probably sit down, watch it more than once. It's this really serious topic that's been lingering for a long time. People may have some mixed emotions about this conversation, but I have the best person with me. And what we're going to be discussing today is, look, the medical spas are growing rapidly and why accreditation is no longer optional. I have my guest and a very, very good friend of mine, Tom Terranova. Tom is brilliant. He's been part of Quad A. We'll dive into that. But you guys, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. It's about operational excellence, that our firm is all about efficiencies, profitability, sustainability, and safety for any aesthetic practice. And I am so blessed and honored, we'll dive into it, that I've been sitting on the Quad A MedSpa Accreditation Task Force, and we have been working diligently over the past year. Tom and I will dive a little bit into that in a moment, to work on elevating the standards, creating the standards, the compliance and the safety measures across the industry. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here. The timing is incredible. Medical spa shows coming up. A lot of conferences are just starting, and I know we've been working on this for a long time. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for having me back. I know we talked about this a little bit while it was in process. I think it was last year. So
Yeah.
as you said, it's super timely to now we're kind of at the starting line and ready to really let it take off in the market later this month. Spoiler alert. And so, like you said, it's a pivotal moment. It's a watershed moment for med spas, I think, right now. And it's a great time to be having the conversation, especially, there isn't a better person to be having it with than you.
Thank you. So you guys, let's give a little context here. The Quad A Task Force was focusing on creating standardization for medical spas, really establishing the guidelines around medical oversight, the scope of practice, documentation, training standards, and operational compliance. And so the goal, why is it? This isn't to scare you guys, and it's not to put any false sort of preconceived notions on this, but what it's for is to protect patients, protect providers, and to really bring some credibility and structure to this industry that's rapidly growing. We have seen enough news articles coming down, some very scary ones. People are dying. People are buying shit off the internet, and we can't mixing Botox in the car, for God's sake. And this is real, right? Tom and I share stories all the time. So as the industry continues to mature, accreditation will separate many, many, many businesses into really true healthcare enterprises. And so since 2024, Quad A has been building something this industry has really never had before around the medical spa accreditation. Is that right? We've been doing this.
Yeah. I mean, look, we've talked before, and I know you're frequently at the same events I'm at. Quad A's history is in the surgical side of aesthetics. That's where our origin is. Our origin story is 1980. We've been doing this for 46 years in every medical and surgical specialty in dentistry, anywhere they're using anesthesia. And so, this is not that. This is not surgery. We all know that. But this is healthcare, and this is an enterprise that touches patients in a very real way, has a lot more touch points and frequency with the patients. And it was sort of a natural endeavor to move into this direction because the growth of this segment of the market is very similar. It parallels very, very nicely with what happened with plastic surgery in the 80s and 90s as it grew exponentially and was unregulated and also was subject to the same market forces that aesthetics are. It's very different than gastroenterology and ophthalmology and places where you're looking for Medicare reimbursement or insurance reimbursement. There's a problem. What's attractive about this industry is one of the things that can be a complicating factor, and that's the economics involved. And we know they're big economics, and we know they're great, and there's plenty of opportunity to grow, but we want to make sure the right guardrails are there. We want to make sure that the good practitioners aren't stuck in a race to the bottom price-wise with the people who are doing things inappropriately. And the only way to do that is to differentiate and separate yourself. And just, again, as a quick preview, I had an epiphany like 3 weeks ago. I was at a big medical event, and we were talking about accreditation and how just boring of a topic it sounds. And when we talk about being safe, everyone turns their brain off because they're like, I'm safe. I know what I'm doing. But the reality is all of
Yeah.
accreditation is really like self-improvement. It's self-help, right? There's a $14 billion a year industry on leadership training and organizational excellence. Look at it that way. It's much more exciting if we talk about building up our organization, being stronger, being more resistant, resilient, risk aware, risk mitigating, all of those things. And we're not talking about just technical compliance and very boring topics. We're talking about how to take your business, your enterprise, your practice, and strengthen it in all areas so that you can grow financially. That's the outcome. That's not the input. That's the outcome.
Yeah, I love that you just said that. People frown upon this. They don't want to do it. They don't want to pay attention. They're like, oh my God, this other thing I'm going to have to do and pay for. But you just even spun it to me in such a way that it's like, who the hell wouldn't? Right? We are all striving, really, right? We're all striving every day or putting money candidly in some of the wrong areas. I teach on my side how much more everybody's bitching. They want more marketing, more equipment, more patients. But I'm like, we got to fix the infrastructure. We got to fix the
Sure.
foundation. So many of our listeners may know you and many may not. I mean, I certainly could read your bio. It's pretty extensive and very impressive. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about you, a little bit about Quad A, and let's take us back for a moment on when this task force started.
Yeah, sure. To set the stage, as I mentioned, Quad A has been around since 1980. I have been around Quad A since 2009. I actually worked in the regulatory affairs department. Originally came in as a director of regulation and government affairs, which ties very closely with what we all may see coming up around the bend in terms of the med spa space, and that is regulation and legislation might be coming. Right? Part of what the plastic surgeons did in the 80s was try to get ahead of that with a program that they helped design that had third-party arm's length assessment to make sure that they could demonstrate to those regulators, this is well in hand. We've got this in hand, so that there wasn't an overcorrection. So I actually started in that world. And then I moved into director of accreditation roles to kind of oversee all the programs, was the COO at one point in history, left to practice law for a few years, and then came back as the CEO in 2019. So I've been serving in this function since 2019. And as you noted, this specific initiative really kind of picked up steam in 2024. We've been hearing bubblings for a couple of years about, wow, we really need to look at this. We need to get ahead. Or people in consulting roles or working in the industry were saying, my clients are thirsting for this. My clients who are high achievers, who are the leaders in the industry, they're clamoring for it because they're dealing with bad situations. They're dealing with adverse events that come from up the street. They have patients who have horror stories. We've got to get our hands around this. And sort of it was bubbling. And it was bubbling not just in the United States, but we have interaction, we have relationships in the UK, in the UAE, and it was coming at us from all those directions. And so in 2024, we put together a working group, and it was sort of on the fly. We kind of sat down at lunch at a meeting and had surgeons there. We had people who were working in spas that are injectors. We had people who were on the investment side who sat down for the very first time and said, let's put this working group together. Let's get input from all areas of the industry, all the inputs, all the stakeholders, so that it's not surgeon-led, it's not physician-led, it's really representative of the industry, and let's get input and start to put this together. And what we did was we cleaved off a working group that worked subordinate to our standards committee, because frankly, our standards committee don't work in this space, and it would be unfair to ask them to write these standards. And so I think that is a testament to who Quad A is, to say we don't know what we don't know. Let's bring in the people who do know what we don't know and make sure that they have a voice, they have a seat at the table, and collect that information. And what we did was we embarked on about, I think it was a 13-month process where that group met regularly. We consistently looked for outside influence. You were on that committee, Terri. There was other people that were injectors and operators and consultants and trainers. There was finance people who own multiple locations. There were surgeons. There were physicians. And honestly, they brought in people, again, when they didn't know. So the group brought in, whether it was gynecologists who work in specialty areas of aesthetics and wellness, whether it was bringing in ophthalmologists for oculoplastic or oculoaesthetic kind of procedures. So it was a very open process that took place over a good 13-month period. And what I think is really interesting about this is at the end of that 13-month period, when the working group dropped the standards at our committee's foot, the committee then said, great, Now let's get a completely independent body of other practitioners throughout the industry and let's talk to them. And so we put together yet another working group of about 8 or 10 people who were operators, injectors, no physicians on this one. We wanted to make sure we kind of wanted to see how much some of these standards would resonate. And then those folks weighed in on the standards. That was, again, a 6 or 8 month process. Last fall, we published the standards so that now the public, the industry at large, could comment on them. And we published them out through social media, on our website, through our newsletter, and we took input there. At the same time, we actually embarked on 5 pilot surveys. So we sent our inspectors with draft standards into 5 locations in 5 different states to apply the standards, see how they would be interpreted and implemented in the facility, to see, one, how prepared facilities are in their natural state, and see how the med spas reacted to them, and to see what the gap was. Like, what more would they need to do? Was it unreasonable? Was it right? I mean, there is really an art to balancing rigor and reasonableness, and you really want to thread that needle, because I think our organization from the beginning was very aware if we go overboard, it's going to be really hard for people who are operating to adapt to it, and we won't have the impact that we want, which is to save patients and to protect patients. And if we're too lenient, then we're not going to make any difference on the market. So really threading that needle is an art form. And did we get it right? My guess is no. Version 1 is never perfect, right? And we're going to learn things over this first year. But that was the process we took to painstakingly go through, make sure we heard from all directions and avenues and perspectives to make sure that this process, this version 1, was as tight as any version 1 we've ever come up with. And we'll be on version 3 before you know it, because we'll learn a lot and the industry will continue to change really quickly. But then I think we'll hit a steady state and we'll really be able to separate those who want that self-improvement, continuous improvement, quality, safety, differentiate as the luxury safety brand. And they'll very quickly separate from the people mixing the Botox in the car, like you said.
Yeah. So was there one, I want to go back and thank you for that. And I'm sure he swifted it in there a little bit. Obviously, Tom is an attorney and a very data-driven strategist, and I think, again, brings so much to the table. But was there one? There's probably not one thing, but we know so many terrible things, unfortunately, have happened. Was there something that had just convinced you to really take this, a little bit more seriously, to move into this task force that you said we've been doing for about the last year and a half?
I think it was kind of a building drum beat. If you look at things, so I'll throw some numbers at you and I'll throw some numbers at your listeners, because I think numbers are helpful, but I don't want to overwhelm them. So we're talking about right now, over 50% of aesthetic treatments worldwide are non-surgical, about 19 out of 35 million. According, these statistics are probably a couple of years old, but very indicative. As of 2023, the global non-invasive market was about 70 billion. By 2030, we're expected to be at 190 billion. The US med spa market alone sat at about 17 billion in 2023. You're talking volume-wise, we are talking about a massive industry that is, as I've said several times in the US, is not even close to saturated. I think the statistic I saw was about 10,500 or 11,000 centers, med spas in the US, and we're not even close to done yet. If you think there are a lot of competition now, wait 5 years. Here's what I think is really fascinating. The International Society for Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons does a survey every year. The survey is in the types of procedures that are being done. From 2023, the growth in non-surgical procedures was 41%. Over those 4 years. Non-surgical facial procedures, about 49%. Body procedures also up dramatically. And then, so that's the backdrop that we're operating in, and that led to this decision. And then you add into it things that are incredible variables, right? So you have 63% of clinics that are owned by a non-physician. 80% of physician-owned clinics are owned by one of the non-core physicians. And that's probably a somewhat controversial kind of topic to talk about, because there are people that are very good that are non-core physicians in the core four, whatever we want to, however much weight we want to put to that. But the point is, there's a lot of variability, right? The variability is vast, and there are great non-physician owners, there are great non-core medical directors and non-core for owners, but because of that variability, there is doubt, there is confusion, there is noise. And so that, I think, is the backdrop of all of this stuff. And then you add to it things like bad news events. You have, ironically enough, I think we were kind of right in the middle of this process when the John Oliver spot dropped, right? That puts a lot of bad light on the industry. I mean, he's got a huge following. He moves the needle, no, I guess pun intended. And so it's a really important watershed moment. And now earlier this year, around the new year, New York State just issued an internal report where they did inspections of med spas around the state and found rampant safety hazard violations and risks and all these things. So there's this sort of momentum building, and thankfully we're ahead of it, right? Because if legislators act, God forbid someone dies or a lot of people start dying, legislators are gonna react, and the react's gonna be swift and strong, right? So getting the industry input is gonna be helpful. I want to also give you this. This quote I think is really interesting. So there's a guy who was he was the medical director for the NHS in the UK, and he was asked to look into med spa. And this goes back to 2013. His name is Sir Bruce Keogh, and he said, a person having a non-surgical cosmetic intervention has no more protection and redress than someone buying a ballpoint pen or a toothbrush. So that's the backdrop we're operating against. And when you have regulators looking at the industry in that way, and then we start getting we get occlusions, and we get infections, and we get necrosis. They bubble up little by little, and we reach a boiling point. So that was sort of like what happened to us. We were in this sort of moment where sort of the ambient noise around the industry was so big and so loud, and we have so many people that are tangentially related to the space that it sort of reached a point where the noise was too big to say, now it's time for us to get involved before we reach a tipping point, which appears to have been about midway through the process.
Yeah. So, you mentioned, and I want to just make sure the listeners are really clear, when we developed the task force, to Tom's point, we had just a wide variety of people, which leads me into the next questions. From a variability standpoint, were there things that you did or didn't do to help create the standards and to ensure that they either weren't too vague or, to your point, too burdensome that, nobody would want to implement them, or it was going to be too hard?
Yeah. And look, again, I know that we hit the nail on the head? I think we're pretty close, especially for early days, right? Partly we might hit the nail on the head right today, and in 2 years, the industry and the technology will change so much that we'll be in a slightly different environment and have to adapt. But yes, there's a strong negotiation that goes on. I think one of the biggest elements was sort of like safety equipment, right? So if I take a step back and I look at the standards, the very first thing is all med spas aren't created equal. And I don't mean that in terms of safety or quality. What I mean is you may provide an array of services that are very different than the spa up the street. And so the first thing is, well, are we going to expect the same of the two if they're providing wildly different service lines to their patients? And so the very first thing that the committee had to really negotiate, probably months of negotiation, was sort of a risk stratification. Now, when we talk about that from our surgical world, we talk about sort of the level of anesthesia. It's a pretty easy continuum to follow, but this is uncharted territory in med spa. So I really give the working group and the sounding board, second working group, a lot of credit for working through this thing and sort of stratifying our risks. So we started with green, which is like lowest anticipated risk of complications. And so what does that look like? What are the requirements there? They're going to be somewhat less than somebody that's in, I believe the second one is yellow, right? So low to moderate risk. And that's going to have a little bit more like injection, IV access, FDA regulated drugs and device that have a little bit higher complication rate, and maybe some more safety guidelines around that. And then we elevate a little farther to the orange level of risk, which is meaningful risk of tissue injury, vascular compromises, systemic effects. And so we kind of put services into those buckets so that the requirements grow with the services that you're providing. So we're not overbearing on someone who's providing these really low level services, and we're not undercutting someone who's really pushing it towards the edge. And I will say that there's a fourth risk stratification, which is red, which is basically, this is a surgery center. Don't do it in a med spa, right? And we hear about people doing Botox in a med spa, and that's not what it is, right? So I think that was the first thing that was negotiated, and I think that's where I think the diversity of the perspectives in the working group first showed how important it was, right? Because you have some factions who might really want to close that off and shut down certain practices. And then we were able to have moderating voices who came in to say, look, there are people who may not have the MD or the PA designation who have really good experience and training doing this. So how do we quantify that? How do we get the proper oversight, make sure they're sufficiently trained and qualified without shutting them down entirely? And I think that was one. The other one I think was key, and I think this is the purpose of the whole endeavor. And we have a now former chair of our standards committee who is famous for saying, if we're just going to follow what you're doing in practice now, then what are we doing here, right? Like, it's not necessary for us to create a program if we're just not going to change anything. So expect some change. But especially with emergency preparedness, emergency equipment and drugs, I think that was the area where it took a little bit of negotiating to say, for some people to say, well, why should we have that equipment? Well, because the yoga studio up the street has that equipment, and you're doing a medical procedure and you need to be able to respond if a patient has an emergency. We're not saying you have to have a full crash cart and be ready to intubate a patient, but you have to be able to respond if you have an adverse event. No matter how proficient you are as an injector, it's going to happen. And so I think those were, the biggest areas of negotiation. I mean, I don't know, you were there too, and probably more often than me, and have a lot more exposure to it. Did you have one that stuck out to you that you thought was like, oh, this is the one where we really got to hammer this out?
Well, I remember reading, God, it felt like a Bible, It was a lot. And I know we brought some doctors to the table, some in other specialties, women's wellness and other things that we need to consider for the reasons that you just explained. No, I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It was in the beginning when I first read it. I remember talking to Robert Singer, and I'm like, hell no, there's just no way, right? There's no way that this is ever going to fly, that people are going to embrace this. I think that we're at a level, even if V1 isn't perfect. And I know a very good friend of mine just went through your process, and I think she did really well. So she's very excited. And I think that it's, so now flip the positive. And I think everybody should be wanting to embrace this, but let's talk about the skeptics, because we're going to have some.
Sure.
You're going to get pushback. And I want to dive into is this going to be mandated? I know that there's going to be a fee, but what would you say to the people that are just like, I don't want to do this, and right, just skeptical of the whole thing?
Yeah, look, people are in independent practice, whether it's surgery or med spa, because they want to be independent, right? Independence is its own mindset. It is a thing. And so that sort of idea of oversight might be a little bit anathema to some people, and they kind of revolt at the idea. But I think the idea is appropriate oversight, right? The idea is, how do we demonstrate a commitment to safety and quality to people that they begin to trust us again? Not maybe they lost trust, maybe they're skeptical, whatever it is. How do we as a industry, or how do I as a practitioner differentiate myself from the one that scares the bejesus out of the lady down the street that can't decide if they want to get a procedure, right? And so that's number one, right? Without fear mongering. But number two is, truthfully, how do you protect yourself, right? How do you show that you're doing things the right way? Also, because you're not there 24/7 and you're not in every room all the time. So most of what accreditation is designed to do is promote consistency across your staff and consistency over time. So I look at it a lot like a driver's exam. A driver's exam is not designed to make sure that you, Terri Ross, never run a stop sign, you never turn right on red without coming to a full and complete stop, and that you never speed. My guess is, if we were monitoring to make sure you never sped, you'd probably be in cuffs right now, just knowing you a little bit. My sense is that you'd probably be facing problems.
Really?
But that's how I look at this, right? Like, a driver's exam is to show that you know the rules of the road, you know how to behave toward them, and that you're capable of behaving toward them. So that's what we're doing here. We're saying, let's set this up. You now show that you're aware of what's what, how things should work, appropriate protections, protocols. You are aware of how to train up your staff to make sure that they are consistently doing the same thing, they're getting the right consents, that they are following the right hand hygiene. And then when your back is turned, that you have some level of assurance that you're not getting stabbed in the back essentially and exposing yourself to some sort of heavy duty risk. Look, I want, there's another data piece here that I think is really interesting. So we worked with some researchers and we did some systemic reviews. In 2024, there was a review of 98 published reports. And these were, it was like a wide study of other reports. And there was 53 studies that went into this thing that found 10 cases of blindness, 8 cases of immunologic injury, 6 pulmonary injury, 5 neurologic injury, 3 arterial occlusions, and 2 fatalities. And what they found when they did this big systemic review is massive underreporting of adverse events. So the skeptics are going to say nothing bad happens or nothing real bad can happen. Oh, we have a little, we can deal with it. It's a small thing. First, the staff needs to know how to deal with the small thing. But secondly, there are serious events that often go unnoticed, underreported. Maybe you're ignorant to it because the patient's run into the ER and they never told you. So there is a backdrop of risk that we're trying to avoid. And if we're serious as a group and as a provider type, essentially, as an industry, it's important to say, I'm not going to be those, right? I'm going to differentiate myself. I'm going to be Mercedes. I'm going to be Volvo. I'm not going to be the low-cost option. That's my plea to the skeptic.
I mean, I've been, obviously, since being on the task force, I've been able to talk a little bit about it, shed light on it. I just came back from 2 huge trainings. They have 700 providers over 42 states. And I was just in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a private equity group that owns 6 practices. You know, the amount of people, like the excitement that they're like, holy shit, we've been literally like waiting for this. You know, now let's kind of flip into, what does it look like? Like, what is the launch mechanics of this look like? You know, what is success? What's going to happen when we roll this out, and what do practices have to do? And then what does it look like for the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, well, first of all, you touched on something I think is important. That's private equity, right? As consolidation happens, I think that's going to play a huge factor here, and it's going to play a huge factor for the independent practices downstream. 1, when you want to sell out, and 2, who you're competing against. I have a meeting with a private equity firm 2 days from now. They own 10 facilities and are looking to bring on like 30 more. And I've talked to a few people in the legal space around M&A in this space. And when I practiced law, I did M&A with technology. And there are these certain quality and safety assessments that you do on your code when you're trying to sell a product of a technology business to make sure that you haven't pirated code, that there's not, Trojan horses set in there, that they're safe, that they're secure, that there's no malware kind of embedded in what you're selling to some firm. These are routine assessments. And whenever we would encounter a deal where some small startup never did those assessments, it was an immediate red flag to the acquirer, right? And at the very least, they want you to go through one now. That's the way I'm seeing private equity and lawyers in the mergers and acquisition side looking at accreditation, right? This is, if I'm acquiring 15 med spas across 10 states, my risk is not, the risk of one med spa times 15. It's probably times 30 or 40 because I'm in multiple states. My providers are different. My medical directors are different. They have different assumptions. My risk goes through the roof. And so they're looking for standardization in acquisition. They're looking for standardization in expansion and growth. And I think that's partly what success looks like. So for a solo, you're going to compete with those guys, and or you may want to sell to them one day. I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it, success looks to me like the cream of the crop starts, right? When Quad A first launched in 1980, in that first year, 100 of the best plastic surgeons enrolled. That was about 100. I mean, it might have been off by 1 or 2. It was a voluntary initiative to show how great they were, to show that it was a differentiator, to show that they were on the up and up and everything was done according to spec. And they were able to signal themselves out. And so there was very little pain for those people because these are the high achievers. These are the best of the best. And so I think they led people in that direction. They kind of pulled the industry with them. And I think that would be success to me. You have some big actors, you have some big names, you have some private equity firms that really want to show the difference. And they're going to step out in front and say, I'm the pioneer. I'm the leader, and I'm going to show through action why I'm different and why others should follow me on this. And even if it's not a big number, I think that starts the movement towards safety as a key strategic component of the industry, not a cost center, but a key strategic component of the industry.
With this industry being just too competitive, right? It is a commodity. And when I teach, and we've done, I think, 9 physical on-sites already just in the first 2 months of the year, that everybody's trying to have a unique value proposition. I'm like, look, here in Beverly Hills, when I had the med spa in a 3-mile radius, there's 400 people. Everybody's doing the same thing. So what is, right? You can't just say, oh my God, he's great and double board certified and she's awesome. My staff's great. That's not different. There's nothing, the shit's all the same. And so then how do patients choose? Then they're choosing by poverty mentality because there's specials being run everywhere. And I'm like, this is still medicine, serious medicine. And so I love that this will allow people, to your point, if you want to be a pioneer, if you want to have a higher valuation, if that's your legacy that you eventually want to sell, that you have an opportunity just to do the right thing, which will help you stand out in a sea of, right, just competition and really just do things above board.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think the point is, right, like for those high achievers, those like market leaders, the gap, as you said, when your client who just went through this is not going to be that big. Maybe some changes, maybe some protocols. I was just at a training on Friday, and one of the people there was a nurse practitioner who happened to also have gone through our pilot program. And she was like, yeah, let's go. Like, when are we going to start? Right. So like, those are the people that it's not that big of a, yeah, she's like, yeah, I have some things to change, but that's fine. Right? They're not going to see a huge gap. And frankly, the people who do see a huge gap, like, yeah, this is a good thing to do. This is the strategic imperative. Let's move it a little bit. Invest a little in yourself to get a lot more out of yourself. And one of the things that you really touched on is hugely important. And I don't always like to make the extension of surgery, but you talk about double board certified, super trained, whatever. That's all really important. But we did some research in 21 and 22 with patients. We had like 600 patients. It was a blind study. They didn't know we were testing them. We were testing about patient decision making, right? And is it a poverty mentality? Are they doing it in a noisy environment? Do they have anything to latch onto besides price to differentiate? And the truth is, when they don't, and often they don't, they're confused, they have anxiety, all of these things, and they're just, okay, well, I guess this one's cheaper, right? The reality is, once we provided information and messaging, the most important thing was not the qualification of, in this case, the surgeon or the primary person. It was the fact that everyone on the staff had to undergo initial and ongoing training, recertification, and appraisal of their skills. When they know, even in surgery, that the nurse, the techs, the assistants, everyone in there is constantly in a continuous improvement phase, that was the single most impactful piece of messaging that they could receive. And so when you're talking about a med spa, we're talking about bleeding safety, bleeding quality throughout your entire organization. Maybe bleeding's not the right term, but I'll find a better one someday. But we're trying to feed that all through the organization, because that's really what is the hook for the patient, right? Like, I'm going to be safe here, right? Then if you're confident, if everything in the neighborhood's safe, now let's compete on other things, my bedside manner, my design, my style, whatever. But at the very least, let's set the floor at, we're all equally safe and we're all equally, on the up and up. I think that's the key.
So now what's next? Obviously, we have Medical Spa Show coming up in, second week of April. I'll be there. But what people do now, I mean, is this rolled out now? And if people are interested, or is there a time frame to this? What's next?
Rollout is imminent. I think right now we're targeting March 12th, 13th for the part on our website to go live. Don't quote me on that. Because to your point, Terri, our committee is still haggling over wording because they want to make sure they get it right?
Yeah.
So we're really pushing for the 12th to 13th, but you have really passionate people wanting to make sure things are done right. And so, hopefully we don't slip from that, but that's what we're looking at. We're talking about imminent launch. What you're going to see from us is social media information. Any listener should go to quada.org. It's www.quada.org. That's our website. That's where everything lives. You can, again, by the 12th, the page will be up. Our web portal, which is actually how facilities apply, is there. You click through to get to the web portal, create a profile, log in, start to do your application. There is a PDF of the standards. We do everything digitally, but obviously you need some standards to work off of. That's there. If you follow us on social media, I think it's Instagram, X, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and I think it's all Quada now are the handles. We have our own podcast, but you can look there. If you go to the website, you can also subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out every 2 weeks for like updates on standards as they get revised, is there interpretive guidance, as there's webinars, because we're doing webinars to train the people up who don't know what to do, how to get started. All that is available. I believe there's already 30 or 40 facilities in the hopper to kind of go through the process.
Amazing.
Even right now, people could email info@quada.org to say, hey, I want in. And then from there, it becomes just a matter of you being ready as a facility. The biggest variable in our process, we're ready to go. Biggest variable for us is, are you ready? And the reason I say that is because when someone applies for accreditation, they're given an accreditation specialist that lives with them forever. And that person's your point of contact. So if you say, I have no idea how to write this protocol, they can send you a template. They can help guide you. If you don't know where to get a piece of equipment or an infection control protocol, they can send you links. They're there to help bridge that gap with you. And then when you're ready, that's when we schedule the inspection. I want to say this really important point. This is an on-site peer-based inspection. This is someone else who knows your life, who knows what you're going through, who's been there, who knows how this process works, who knows the standards to come in and help assess. And they're not judging you and your technique. They're looking for operational safety and then to help be an educator. And once that's done, that's when you get the accreditation. So that usually takes a few months. So what we expect is that we'll start to see a roll in of applications. People start prepping. Probably people start asking questions about the standards that we realize might need some tweaking. And then once those surveys start to roll in, we'll start to recognize what we call our pioneers. And that's something no one can take away from you, right? When you're among the first 10 in any state or in any country to be accredited, if 1,000 more come after you, you still are distinguished as a pioneer. You are one of the people that set the trend and moved ahead. And so that's what we're really expecting in this first few months, is those people who want to be at the tip of the spear, to be getting differentiated, to be getting recognized as pioneers. That's what we expect. It's all on our portal. As you log in and create a profile, you'll create your application for your center. And if you have multiple centers, you can create multiple applications and move it through. I will say, obviously, it's a new program. We tried to make sure that it fit both programmatically and financially for facilities. And also, there is incentive for any accredited surgery centers, often who have appended med spas. So where if you have an accredited surgery center with us, you can bundle on the med spa as well. So there's a discount for that as well.
I mean, this was fantastic. And I don't know if you want to comment. I'm sure people are going to ask, and you guys all know I'm always here for you. DM me, call me. I want to hear from you as well, and to support this endeavor that I've been really part of and so blessed to be part of it. Can you talk about the fee, Tom, or is that still being worked out?
No, I can talk about it. So the fee is, so anybody who's not familiar with accreditation, it's typically a 3-year cycle. We survey year 1, year 2 and 3. There's some self-survey processes that go on as kind of a check as things evolve and as your staff turns over, to make sure that you're staying on the straight and narrow. Year 4, we start over with another inspection, and so on and so forth. So year 1's a little more expensive. That's when we have the inspection. We actually come out on site to look at it at the facility. The inspection itself is $1,500. That is basically our cost to get someone to you and have them pay their expenses and have them do the inspection. And then sort of the accreditation fee, annual fee, administrative fee, whatever you want to call it, for med spa is a flat fee. So if you have two injectors or 20, it's a flat fee of $1,000 a year. I think, for me, I know almost any business, any bill you have as a business is not going to add up to less than $1,000 a year. It's what, like 80 bucks a month or whatever. So I think it's a really smart investment for safety and quality. As we said before, if somebody has an attached surgical center that they're adding MedSpa to, they get a discount of 20% because obviously we're working with them already. It allows us to be a little bit more efficient with time. You mentioned marketing before. I love marketing. It's an interesting thing. It's a great dynamic. People invest a lot in it. With AI now, I'm always a little cynical of people who are like, oh, we're going to up your followers. And you're wondering, like, are you just building a bot that's going to give me like 1 million followers, right? So instead of spending 80 bucks a month on a bot that gives you, instead of investing 80 bucks a month in a bot that's going to give you a lot of followers, I think this is something more tangible and more sustainable for the business that keeps you in a partnership to keep you in high safety and high quality.
I have to laugh because, right, and we don't get it often. And my phone was before jumping on this podcast. I have to laugh, but I'm humbled just in terms of talking about investments. But I was in Raleigh, as I mentioned, with 6 clinics, and then I was doing the Skin Click, and they bring in like a group of 20 to 25 NPs over the course of time. But people will say, God, Terri, I'm expensive, and I'm like, well, you get what you pay for, right?
Right.
And if we can right? Almost like 10x evaluation. But I'm saying that because, Tom, the number that you even just said, it's like the cost of 2 syringes, for God's sake. And so when everybody at the end of the year was talking about write-offs and investments and lasers and this and that, the amount of calls I've equally gotten this year, our team, with businesses buying equipment that's just sitting there and now they're not making money. So I just put that into perspective, you guys, that what Tom said, let's just sort of sum it up. This is so much bigger than a program. I mean, this is about legitimacy. It's about leadership. It is about professionalism. Is it about pioneering, leveling up for standardization that is just going to, mature over time and who benefits, right? Well, as we said earlier, you benefit, the patients benefit, providers benefit, the industry benefits. And so the choice is yours right now. The standards are not meant to be restrictions. As Tom was explaining, it's really meant to provide such a level of consistency and clarity and safety in silly things that we may not even think about sometimes. So it's protection for you, and it does support really everything that we do as a company as well. So, Tom, thank you so much. This was incredible. I think the timing is perfect. We're going to be doing a lot more together, so please stay tuned. I'll be at AM Spa. Hopefully Tom will be there as well. I have, I think, 3 or 4 talks, but I really want you guys to know my tribe, my listeners. And if you're new, welcome to this podcast, because it really is about finance, sales, operations, profitability, efficiencies, all the business fundamentals that we do. But compliance is a really big part of this. And so, if this resonated with you, I cannot say enough, Tom. I want you to reach out to Tom, reach out to Quad A. Please go on the website. Be the first, right? Being in the middle is not the greatest place to be. And last, we're going to be behind the 8 ball. So
I want to say one thing, and I know you want to wrap this up, but I think you just said something that I want to reinforce. Profitability, return on investment, all of that strategic business imperative. I cannot think that this is not that. I think it's really important that leaders in the med spa space don't see this as a cost center, but as something for ROI. And I actually had a presentation that I gave at CCR in London years ago about this space as we were starting this initiative, that industry that patient study that I talked about before. One of the most interesting stats I found about this is that 35% of patients are unwilling to look at an elective procedure outside of a hospital. Now, we're probably talking about medicine, right? But it underlines the skepticism towards the non-hospital setting, towards outpatient setting, towards clinics and things like that. It's a 12% difference between the hospital and the non-hospital. So you're starting out with a bit of skepticism. What I find most fascinating is that 58% of those skeptics could have their mind changed with some critical information. In that group, we provided really basic information about accreditation, did not identify Quad A, but very basic information about accreditation. The impact was positive on the trust and the care and the worthiness and the perception of safety in the facility. in 80% of the patients. So I want to reinforce this. 80% of the patients saw the facility as more trustworthy immediately, and by a factor of about 20%. So a lot of people, a big difference. And to me, if a marketing agency said for $1,000 a year, I can improve your trust factor with your patients, with 80% of patients by a factor of 20%, you'd sign up immediately. So I want people to look at this as a business strategic imperative that is ultimately ethical because it benefits the safety of the patients. And as a nonprofit, that's why we keep it at such a reasonable rate. Our job isn't to maximize our profits. You guys go ahead and do that for your businesses. We're here to serve that mission of patient safety by offering a really strong return on your investment in safety for the patient and for your own business.
Yeah. I mean, look, the fees are it's beyond reasonable. And I don't think anybody would question what that investment's going to look like. But this was incredible. Tom, thank you so much for, again, being on the show for something that's so important in such a pivotal time right now. You guys stay tuned. March 12th, give or take, is going to be coming up in the next week or so. As you know, you can certainly reach out to me. Tom gave his information, quada.org. Tom, if people want to reach out, I don't know if you want them to reach out to you directly. We'll have all of the links and everything, you guys, in the show notes of where to go. But as I mentioned, I hope you listened with this with true intention. It's the beginning of 2026. Everybody is really looking to evolve, to expand, to enhance, and to level up, not just on skill set, right? I very much appreciate that so much credence is given to your skill, and I want you to continue to do that. But the same level of importance needs to be, which is exactly why you guys, most of you know, we have 4S. That's our business conference. This is our 3rd year. And I can't speak enough about that. This is a business of aesthetics. And to Tom's point, this is part of that sort of requirement. So I love y'all so much. If you want to watch this episode, I invite you. It will be on YouTube as well, but please, share this with your colleagues and your peers. Thank you again, Tom. I can't wait to do more with you. It's going to be a gangbuster year. And I hope you guys resonated with this, but thanks so much, Tom. Look forward to hearing from you guys. And I will see you on the next episode of In Touch with Terri. Ciao, guys.